I was sitting in that drab hotel room, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. And in that moment, it all snapped into place, brutally clear. Months, maybe even years, of my life had been a lie. Olivia, the woman I married, the one I trusted completely, had been living a double life. I was just the safe choice, the placeholder, while she pined for someone else. It hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just losing my wife, I was realizing I'd never truly had her. The dull, constant ache of grief I'd been carrying for days, it sharpened into something cold and hard. It was acceptance. And that's when I finally understood everything that had led me to this room, to this crushing revelation. You see, up until a few nights ago, I honestly thought we were happy. We'd been together for 5 years total, married for 3 of those, and it felt like we had it figured out. No kids yet, but we were planning to start trying soon, maybe in the next 6 months. I thought I knew Olivia inside and out, understood every part of her. But I guess some people are just really good at hiding whole sections of their heart. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Phoenix. I still remember her laughing at some dumb joke I made about the karaoke machine. And that laugh? It just pulled me in. We clicked immediately, bonding over our shared obsession with true crime podcasts and terrible horror movies. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. The wedding felt natural, like the most obvious next step in the world. And our life together was easy, in all the right ways. Then there was Ethan. He was her high school sweetheart. You know, the kind of first love story that sounds almost cinematic when you hear it. They dated from sophomore year through the first 2 years of college. According to Olivia, they just grew apart when they transferred to different universities. She always described it as mutual and mature, 2 people who loved each other but realized they wanted different futures. Every time his name came up, which wasn't often, she'd wave it off with this casual tone that made it seem like ancient history. We were kids, she'd say. We didn't know what we wanted. I never had a reason to doubt her. I'm not the jealous type, and I never felt threatened by an ex from over 7 years ago. So I never asked too many questions. Honestly, I didn't think I needed to. But looking back now, there were moments that should have bothered me more than they did. A few months before everything exploded, I noticed she'd get this weird, distant look whenever someone mentioned Ethan's name at gatherings, especially since we had a few overlapping friends from her old small town in Vermont. Her phone became this constant companion that she'd flip over whenever I walked into the room. She started staying up later than usual, scrolling through something she'd quickly close when I asked what she was reading. I chalked it up to work stress. She'd just started a new project at her marketing firm in Dallas, and she seemed tired all the time. There was this one night, about 6 weeks before everything came crashing down, where we were watching a movie. I reached for her hand, and she just didn't really respond. She was physically there but mentally a million miles away. I remember asking if she was okay, and she snapped out of it with this forced smile. Yeah, sorry, she said. Just thinking about the campaign. And I let it go because I wanted to believe her. Then came that Friday evening that changed everything. We were on the couch after dinner, just scrolling through Netflix, trying to pick something to watch. Her phone rang. It was a number she clearly recognized because her face went completely white. She grabbed it so fast she almost dropped it, and I watched her hands start shaking as she answered. I couldn't hear the other person, but I heard her voice crack when she said, "Please tell me he's alive. Please." My stomach dropped before I even knew what was happening. She listened for maybe 20 seconds, then covered her mouth with her free hand, tears already streaming down her face. When she hung up, she could barely get the words out. "It's Ethan," she choked. "There was a serious car accident. They said it's bad." I felt this weird mix of sympathy and confusion. Why was she this destroyed over an ex from almost a decade ago? But then she hit me with the line that I'll probably replay in my head for the rest of my life. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "I still love him," she said. "I need to be there. Drive me now." It wasn't a request. It was a demand. The way she said it, with zero hesitation and zero awareness of what those words would do to me, felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped out something vital. I just stood there for a second, trying to process if I'd heard her correctly. She was already grabbing her purse and keys like my response didn't even matter. My brain was screaming at me to say no, to ask what the hell she meant, to do literally anything except agree. But my body went on autopilot, and I heard myself say, okay, even though nothing about this was okay. The drive to the hospital was maybe 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. She didn't say a single word to me, just stared out the window, crying silently, while I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I kept thinking that if I refused to drive her, I'd be the bad guy, the heartless husband who couldn't understand a crisis. But if I did drive her, then I was basically accepting that her first instinct in a tragedy was to run to another man. There was no winning here, and I knew it. But I kept driving because some part of me still wanted to be the good husband, even though she just admitted she loved someone else. When we pulled up to the emergency entrance, she didn't even wait for me to fully stop before she was out of the car, sprinting toward the automatic doors. I parked and walked in a few minutes later, following the signs to the ICU waiting area. And that's where I saw them. Olivia was wrapped in Ethan's family's arms, his mother stroking her hair while she sobbed into some woman's shoulder. Then Ethan's dad guided her toward a room where I assumed Ethan was. I watched from about 30 feet away as she went into that room. And through the window, I could see her grab his hand and lean over his bed. The way she looked at him told me everything I needed to know. She looked at him the way she used to look at me in our first year. Together, like he was her whole world. And I realized with crushing clarity that I wasn't her husband in that moment. I was just the driver who delivered her to the man she actually wanted. I didn't wait around to see how long she'd stay or if she'd even remember I existed. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional car passing by. When I got to our apartment in Dallas, I moved like I was in a dream. Pulling out the big suitcase from the closet and filling it with clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and the few things that mattered to me. I left behind the stuff we bought together, the picture frames, the kitchen gadgets, the throw pillows she'd picked out, because none of that felt like mine anymore. I grabbed my important documents from the file cabinet, my passport, my birth certificate, anything I might need for whatever came next. Before I left, I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a note on the back of an old grocery receipt because I couldn't find real paper. Honestly, I didn't want to spend another second searching. All I wrote was, "He can have you now." Because what else was there to say that she hadn't already made clear? I propped it against the coffee maker where I knew she'd see it first thing in the morning, grabbed my bags, and walked out of that apartment without looking back. I drove to a hotel near my office, checked in under the harsh fluorescent lights of the lobby, and collapsed onto the stiff hotel bed with my phone still in my hand. That's when it started exploding. By the time I woke up in that hotel room the next morning, I had 47 missed calls and over 60 text messages. Olivia's name dominated my notification screen, and I watched the tone of her messages shift from panic to confusion to straight-up anger as I scrolled through them. The early ones, from around 2 in the morning, were frantic, asking where I was and if I was safe. But by 6 in the morning, they'd turned accusatory, demanding to know how I could just leave without talking to her first. What struck me hardest was that not a single message asked how I was feeling or acknowledged what she'd actually said to me. It was all about how I'd inconvenienced her by not being there when she got home. I didn't respond right away because I honestly didn't know what to say. Instead, I took a shower, got dressed, and sat on the edge of that hotel bed, staring at my phone for a solid 20 minutes before I finally typed back that we needed space. Her response came through in less than 30 seconds. A wall of text, explaining that I'd misunderstood everything and that she didn't mean it the way it sounded. She claimed she was in shock and that people say things they don't mean in emergencies. But the problem was that she'd said it with such conviction, such certainty, like those words had been sitting in her chest, waiting for permission to come out. I wrote back telling her she hadn't hesitated for even a second, then turned off my phone because I couldn't handle watching her try to rewrite what I'd witnessed with my own eyes. When I finally turned my phone back on a few hours later, her strategy had completely changed. Now she was telling me I was insecure, that I was overreacting to a moment of crisis, that any decent husband would have understood she was just worried about an old friend. She actually used the word platonic in one message, like I was supposed to believe her declaration of love was some kind of friendship statement. The gaslighting was so blatant, it would have been funny if it wasn't completely destroying me. And I realized she wasn't sorry about what she'd said. She was angry that I wasn't playing along with whatever revised version of events she was trying to sell. By Sunday afternoon, the social pressure started rolling in. Her best friend, Chloe, sent me a long message about how Olivia was devastated and how I needed to stop being stubborn and come home. 2 of our mutual friends from her side called me, asking what happened. I could tell from their tone that Olivia had fed them some sanitized version where she'd had a family emergency, and I'd just abandoned her in her time of need. I didn't defend myself because, honestly, I was too tired to explain. And part of me wanted to see how far she'd take this narrative. My brother called that evening, asking what the hell was going on because everyone was saying I'd left Olivia at a hospital. When I told him the actual story, with the exact words she'd used, he went quiet for a long time before telling me that wasn't what people were hearing at all. The only person who seemed to smell something off was my best friend, Noah. We met for coffee on Monday morning before work, and I laid out everything exactly as it happened. No edits, no softening the blow. Noah listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "That doesn't track. Something else is going on here." I felt this wave of relief that at least one person believed me. He reminded me that Olivia had been weird for months, distant and distracted. He mentioned that his girlfriend had heard through the grapevine that Olivia used to talk about Ethan like he was the one that got away. I'd brushed off those comments at the time as just nostalgic reminiscing, but now they felt like breadcrumbs leading to something I'd been too trusting to see. That conversation with Noah planted a seed I couldn't shake. I started replaying moments from the past year. Little things that hadn't seemed important at the time, but now fit into a pattern. The way she perked up when someone mentioned Ethan got engaged about 15 months ago, and then how she'd seemed almost relieved around 10 months back when we heard through mutual friends that the engagement had been called off. The weekend trip she took to her hometown in Vermont without me about 4 months ago, claiming it was just a getaway with some old friends. But now I was wondering if Ethan had been anywhere near that town. The late-night phone call she'd take. In the bathroom, saying it was her mom having insomnia and needing someone to talk to. I wasn't planning to go looking for proof because, honestly, I didn't want to become that person who snoops through their spouse's things. But life has a funny way of handing you answers when you stop searching for them. On Tuesday evening, I stopped by the apartment while Olivia was at work to grab some more of my clothes, and her laptop was open on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to snoop, I was literally just walking past it to get to the bedroom. But a notification popped up on the screen from a messaging app one didn't recognize. The preview was just visible enough for me to read a message about never stopping thinking about someone, and the sender name was just a letter E. My hands were shaking as I moved the mouse to keep the screen from going dark. I knew I shouldn't look. Knew this was crossing a line. But I also knew I deserved to understand what I was actually dealing with. The chat thread was long, going back months. I only had to scroll for about 30 seconds before I had everything I needed. Messages from Olivia talking about choosing wrong and how she should have fought for their relationship, saying Ethan belonged with her and not with whoever else he'd been seeing. There were messages about how she thought about their last summer before college every single day. Ethan's responses were just as bad, talking about how he'd never gotten over her and how his failed engagement was because he kept comparing everyone to Olivia. There were messages about meeting up when she was in town, conversations about what their life could have been like if they'd stayed together, and plans to see each other that lined up with that trip she'd taken 4 months ago. I didn't read every message because I didn't need to. I'd seen enough. I pulled up my phone and took photos of the screen, making sure to capture dates and context, then sent them to my own email before closing the laptop and walking out. The drive back to the hotel was a blur, and I remember my hands being so steady on the wheel. No shaking, no tears, just this cold clarity settling over me like ice water. The grief I'd been feeling for the past few days crystallized into something harder and cleaner, something that felt like acceptance. I wasn't losing my mind, wasn't overreacting, wasn't insecure. I was just finally seeing the truth that had been hiding in plain sight. When I got back to my hotel room, I sat down and stared at those screenshots for a long time. Part of me had hoped I'd find nothing, that I'd feel stupid for doubting her. But instead, I found validation that felt worse than any betrayal because it meant months of my life had been a lie. She'd been emotionally mistreating me, probably longer than these messages even showed. And she'd been so good at hiding it that I'd never suspected a thing. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted completely, had been living a double life where I was just the safe choice while she pined for someone else. That night, Noah came over with food and found me just sitting there with my laptop open to those photos. He read through them, and his face went hard in a way I'd never seen before. All he said was, "Lawyer, now. First thing tomorrow." And I nodded because I knew he was right. I knew there was no coming back from this, even if some stupid part of me still wanted to try. I called a divorce attorney named Mr. Harrison that Noah's cousin had used. Left a voicemail explaining I needed a consultation as soon as possible. And then I finally let myself feel the full weight of what I'd lost. Mr. Harrison's office had that smell of leather and old books you'd expect from a divorce attorney who'd been doing this for 20 years. We met on Wednesday morning, and I laid out everything, the hospital scene, the messages, the timeline of lies. He listened, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. He told me we'd file for legal separation first and then move to divorce, that we needed to protect my assets and document everything, and that from this point forward, all communication with Olivia should go through him. I felt this weird sense of relief knowing I had someone in my corner who wasn't emotionally involved. Someone who could see the situation for exactly what it was without trying to find excuses for her behavior. Olivia must have sensed the shift because by Thursday, she showed up at my office. My assistant tried to stop her, but Olivia pushed past and walked right into the conference room where I was reviewing some reports. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept in days, and her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She started begging me to just talk to her, saying I was ruining everything over a misunderstanding, that we could fix this if I'd just come home and listen. I stayed calm, kept my voice level, and told her she'd made her choice when she said those words, and that I wasn't interested in hearing revised versions of the truth. She tried to grab my hand, and I pulled away. I watched something shift in her face, from desperation to anger. She accused me of being cold and unforgiving. Said I was throwing away our marriage over one moment of panic. I just looked at her and said, "You chose him. Own it." And watched her face crumble. Security escorted her out after that. I had to sit in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Part of me felt guilty for being so harsh, but the larger part knew that any softness I showed her would be interpreted as weakness, as an opening to manipulate me back into playing the role of understanding husband. I'd been that person for too long already, and it had gotten me nowhere except sitting in a parking lot trying not to have a breakdown. The truth started coming out on its own, without me having to do anything. A few weeks later, one of our mutual friends saw Olivia having lunch with Ethan at some cafe downtown Austin. Apparently, they weren't exactly hiding their familiarity with each other. By then, Ethan had recovered enough from his injuries to be out and about, looking healthier than anyone expected, given how serious the accident had been. Word spread fast through our social circle, and suddenly people were reassessing the narrative Olivia had been selling them. My brother called to apologize for doubting me at first, and even Chloe sent me a message admitting she'd suspected Olivia still had feelings for Ethan but hadn't felt it was her place to say anything. Ethan himself seemed completely unbothered by the chaos, posting photos on social media of himself back to normal life with Olivia visible in the background of more than one shot. The legal process moved forward, and we ended up in mediation about 6 weeks after I'd left. Olivia brought her own lawyer, and the four of us sat in a conference room that felt too small for the amount of tension it was holding. Her attorney tried to paint me as the villain who'd abandoned his wife during a crisis, suggesting I owed her significant compensation for emotional distress. And that's when Mr. Harrison calmly pulled out printed copies of the messages I'd photographed. He slid them across the table, and I watched Olivia's face go pale as her lawyer read through them. Mr. Harrison stated clearly that these messages proved months of emotional infidelity and deception, that trauma didn't type paragraphs about choosing the wrong person. The room went completely silent. Olivia tried to speak, tried to explain that the messages were taken out of context or that they didn't mean what they looked like. But even her own lawyer looked uncomfortable with the evidence sitting right there in black and white. The mediation ended with a fair split of assets and a timeline for divorce that was much shorter than I'd expected. Mostly because Olivia's legal position had completely collapsed once the proof was on the table. I signed the papers, feeling nothing, just this hollow sense of finality, like closing a book I'd already stopped reading chapters ago. The months after that were about rebuilding. I found a decent apartment closer to downtown, started going to therapy every other week to work through the betrayal and the gaslighting, and slowly began to feel like myself again. I picked up running in the mornings, which I'd given up when Olivia said she didn't like me being gone so early. Started cooking meals that I actually enjoyed instead of always compromising on her preferences, and reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from during the marriage. My apartment was quiet in a way that felt peaceful rather than lonely, and I adopted a dog from the shelter, a 3-year-old mutt named Rocket who seemed just as ready for a fresh start as I was. I heard through the grapevine that Olivia and Ethan tried to make a real go of it after everything settled, that they were officially together and telling people they'd rekindled their connection after all these years. I didn't care enough to feel angry about it anymore. It was like hearing news about strangers who vaguely resembled people I used to know. Noah mentioned seeing them at a restaurant and said they looked tense, that the fantasy they'd built up in secret messages probably wasn't surviving the reality of an actual relationship. But I didn't want details because they weren't my problem anymore. About 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message identified itself immediately. It was Olivia, writing from a new phone, saying that things with Ethan weren't what she'd thought they'd be, and asking if we could talk. She said she'd made a mistake and that she understood now what she'd thrown away. That the connection she thought she had with Ethan was based on nostalgia rather than reality. I read the message twice, felt absolutely nothing, and blocked the number without responding. There was nothing to say to her that would change anything, no conversation that would undo months of lies and manipulation. And I'd already wasted enough time trying to understand someone who'd never really chosen me in the first place. I realized, sitting there on my couch with Rocket's head in my lap, that Olivia had kept me as a placeholder, the safe, reliable option while she pined for someone she'd built into a fantasy. The pedestal she'd put Ethan on had finally broken under the weight of reality, but I was already gone by the time she figured that out. She'd wanted me to be there to catch her when it inevitably fell apart. Wanted me to play the role of backup plan one more time. But I'd learned that I deserved to be someone's first choice, or no choice at all. Ethan could have her now. And honestly, they deserved each other. I had my life back, my peace back, and for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe without wondering what she was hiding. That was worth more than any apology she could have offered. Worth more than any explanation or second chance. Because I finally understood that the problem was never about me not being enough. It was about her never being honest about what she actually wanted. And now she'd have to live with that choice while I got to move forward without her. This story makes me wonder, what would you have done in my place?